So inside the Lords this week has been conducted outside the Lords quite a lot, because the beautiful weather has meant that I've been spending a bit of time on the terraces, and not the football terraces, but the House of Lords ones. And it is the case that they've been packed with people because there's been a huge discussion, particularly around the Rwanda plane situation. It's really irritating because people were so delighted that that plane didn't take off. And I think I've said here before that I'm no supporter of the specific Rwanda resolution of the problem of people arriving on boats and control of our borders. It feels to me like outsourcing the problem. There are things about it that I feel incredibly uncomfortable about, like the fact that it's not even a processing place, but you have to stay there, you're effectively deported. But that said, all of that said, an elected government has made that decision, and for it to be stopped by the human rights courts in Strasbourg is a real problem for me. And because it's all of the reasons why many of us voted to leave the European Union, which was that lawmaking would be accountable to the people of the UK. It's a question of sovereignty. It's not a kind of namby-pamby complaint about bleeding heart, namby-pamby human rights lawyers. But there is a problem when legislative processes get in the way of enacting laws. You know, people will say, well, the government wants to break laws, but actually the government makes a law and then can't enact it because of a whole range of legal rules that have been signed up to. And interestingly, the Supreme Court in the UK, which I've got some qualms about that in and of itself, because it was only set up as a political move by Tony Blair anyway, but the Supreme Court had actually okayed that flight to go. So that's, you know, there's a big discussion to be had about that. But in the context of Parliament, the joy, the palpable delight that the Strasbourg court had made this decision, had thwarted evil Priti Patel's plans, was being celebrated. And I thought that that was irresponsible, because it actually just hands over any kind of lawmaking to somebody that's not accountable to the British people. And of course, I really understood the Lords is an unaccountable body, which is why it's also been very irritating that all week here in the House of Lords that people have been saying we are going to stop, absolutely not allow it to happen, the bill that should override or make the protocol ensure that Northern Ireland is not under the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. Now, just today, as I was on my way in here, it seems to become obvious that what the government is saying, and I actually asked this question, and I'll get onto that, is that they will only pursue this bill if the Democratic Unionist Party, the DUP, agree to go to to start administering in Northern Ireland. Therefore, the bill looks to me to be just a paper exercise in bullying the DUP. Why would the DUP believe the government? Because they've been given assurances about the Northern Irish Protocol before. I think the protocol as it's presently happening makes a mockery of Brexit. I hope that I go into the Lords today, I can talk to people from the DUP and see what they think. But my thinking is, if all that this bill is a paper exercise, a kind of almost saber rattling at home rather than anything to do with the EU, to force the DUP to do something, then that's a complete abuse of power by the Conservative government, and I won't support them. If the Conservative government are serious about taking on the EU, that's a whole different matter. And the reason why I say taking on the EU was we had a briefing. We had to go to the Foreign Office, anyone from the Lords who wanted a briefing. We went to the Foreign Office, and it was quite funny because the Foreign Office, everybody kind of turned up with their Lords badges, said, I'm Baroness so-and-so, or I'm Lord so-and-so. And the security guards go, yeah, but it's the Foreign Office, you're not coming in. In other words, the security was particularly heavy. And then when we got in, I was reminded that the UK used to be to rule the world, because if ever there was a seat of power that looked like a seat of power, it's those big rooms of state in the Foreign Office. Anyway, we were given a briefing, and the the tone was to explain to those of us who went to the briefing why this bill was necessary. It was emphasised that the attempts at negotiating with the EU had been done in sincerity and good faith, and I know this because I've talked to people like David Frost before. The EU have been completely intransigent on this, and if you heard Simon Coveney, the Irish foreign minister from he was almost hysterical in demanding that the UK did what the EU said, and that whole thing has been exactly what lies at the heart of the problem. But when I pushed them on the timetable and also made the point that the Lords should not be allowed to stand in the way of this piece of legislation, and all the threats coming from the Lords should be really faced down, the government ministers who were there, I know, kind of went softly, made it out like I was a mad Brexiteer type. And I got suspicious. So now this announcement today that they won't pursue the bill unless the DUP agrees to take up their places in Belfast, that makes me think they're not serious. The other thing that's been happening this week has been the schools bill, and I stayed till late last night to speak on an amendment that would be demanding that parents would have view of any curriculum materials, particularly used by outside activist organisations that have gone in. The reason for this is because when it comes to very contentious issues like, for example, anti-racism, and the fact that many schools have outsourced to providers who go in and teach critical race theory, or very in the news at the moment because teachers know that they have to deliver relationship, sex and health education, and it's a toxic, frightening bed of things that they don't want to do. They then bring in these specialist organisations, and now we found out that those specialist organisations are teaching everything like masturbation to primary school kids, never mind the biological sex versus gender identity issues, breast binding and the rest. So I stayed till very late, and then they ended the session and I didn't get to do my amendment. So I'd only previously talked about religion. Just on that amendment, that's one of the things that can come out of the Lords. I'd suggested that we do that amendment, but I didn't really know how to write the amendment. And Estelle Morris, to her credit, a former education minister herself in the Labour Party, has put the amendment forward. She got together with some parents groups and worked out the way that should be done. So on Monday afternoon we'll be discussing that. The final thing to say is that the Parliament at the moment feels to me that some people keep talking. Lord Geidt has now resigned as the Minister for Standards. Everybody's saying that, and ethics. He's had enough of the unethical Boris Johnson and so on. But I have to say that the whole process of lawmaking, when you see it close and in the round, is pretty grubby and it feels unethical. I'm absolutely convinced that the schools bill, which is beginning to get some media attention, is not something which the Education Minister, Nadine Zahawi, really believes in. I think he will have inherited it when he became the Education Minister. It's been written by people who seem to go completely against the Conservative Party's commitment to autonomy of academies, schools, free school movement, whatever happened to that. It's completely centralising. It's got some very dangerous attacks on homeschooling, on parenting, on data collection of children and families. It's the most intrusive bill ever. If this really represents what the Conservative Education Secretary thinks, then I'm afraid that that this is a real betrayal of all of the things that they argued they were for in terms of freedom and education. I suspect it represents what some people in the back offices want to happen. It's an incoherent bill. It's hard to entirely work out ideologically what it represents, but nonetheless, I think that it's a bill that's come here by accident. Nobody really believes in it, and even the minister doesn't feel convinced when she comes back on the answers. I say that because I just feel as though anyone who thinks that a law is designed and looked at and thought over and really carefully put together, that's a mistake. That's not what happens. They kind of can arrive on you, and then where you do have a law that's specifically designed for now, like that protocol bill law. We then discovered that maybe that's only being used to push another agenda with the DUP in this instance. So I think if there's an ethical question to be asked about Parliament, it's not Partygate and Boris Johnson, it's the whole lawmaking process that needs to be examined. I think that would be worth considering. My final thing is that next week there's a very contentious debate in the Lords about the time that the Lords starts. Now this is going to be the equivalent of the Brexit war in the House of Lords, because the Lib Dems and Labour want the Lords to start at 1 o'clock and finish at 8:30 every night, because they say it goes on too late. And you might think that sounds reasonable, what's wrong with that? But the problem is that if you're in the Lords, you don't work for the Lords, you've got a job. You're meant to have a job, and you then go into the Lords and you claim expenses if you go into the chamber and so on. But the idea is you're people in your own right. So I want to be able to run the Academy of Ideas. For decades and decades, the Lords starts at 2:30 every day, apart from Thursday and Friday when it starts earlier. And it then can go on into the night. And that's the job, as it were. Starting at 1 o'clock and finishing at 8:30. 8:30 is a terrible time to finish. You can't go to an event in the evening. It's not like I can agree to speak at a school or do a talk. It's just a futile time. It might be all right for those people who want to go home and watch the telly, but that's neither here nor there. And if you start at 1, you effectively cut out the working morning for the many peers who have other jobs. Mine is at the Academy of Ideas, I'm proud to say. Other people might be the head of charities. The Labour Party and the Lib Dem pose it as, you know, all these people only want to start late so they can earn their millions in the city before they arrive in. And there will be some who do that, right? That's not also against the law or unethical. But in some instances, it's that you've actually got real jobs that you want to be committed to, and this turns the House of Lords into some kind of professional political machine. In which case, by the way, people should be paid salaries, and in which case they should be treated like MPs and voted for. Because you can't have it always. But they won't be going for that, of course. See you next week.